Hi everyone, and welcome to another Radults Bite, a short-form version of the Radults podcast that's published outside of our usual schedule to take the edge off your hunger for more inspiration. Today's guest is Eric Bischoff, an American entrepreneur, television producer, professional wrestling booker, on-screen personality, and as of recent times, podcasting sensation. Bischoff is of course best known for serving as the executive producer and the president of World Championship Wrestling, and also as the general manager of World Wrestling Entertainment's Raw brand. Bischoff also worked with Total Nonstop Action Wrestling, where he served as the executive producer of their flagship product, Impact Wrestling. Eric Bischoff is a man with a fascinating story, and one that he's been sharing with audiences worldwide via the 83 Weeks podcast, which will be making its Australian live debut in June this year. Eric Bischoff is a Radult, and is our guest today on the Radults Bite. My name's Brenton. I'm the host of the Radults podcast here in Australia. How are you today?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
That's wonderful. Now, for the benefit of the listeners who aren't massive pro wrestling marks like myself, and yes, I'm a dirty, rotten mark, who are you and what do you do?
Well, first of all, I never use the term mark because it's a fairly derisive term within the industry. I love fans, and I like to think of fans as fans and not marks. Who am I? I am a gentleman who has spent probably 30 years in the professional wrestling industry. During that period of time, I worked for small wrestling promoters. That's where I started in Minneapolis and worked my way up to Turner Broadcasting, where I was an announcer. And while I was at Turner Broadcasting, over a period of time, worked my way up to be the president of the division, went into head-to-head competition with the WWF when it was the WWF in the mid-90s, created what is commonly referred to as the Monday Night Wars, which I think almost everybody would agree was probably the golden era of sports entertainment or professional wrestling during our generation. And went on to work for Vince McMahon of the WWE, which is what it became, as the general manager to Monday Night Raw. Had some great matches with Stone Cold Steve Austin and John Cena, Vince McMahon himself, and others. So I've kind of run the gamut. I've gone from being someone who was involved in the business side of wrestling initially to an on-camera talent to a president of the division, and had a pretty good time in the process. How's that?
That's a fantastic summation. It's almost like you've had to cut a promo before.
Well, I've done it once or twice.
Now, you've mentioned there that your career has been quite a wild ride, and it's taken you to many improbable places. But I would say that it is fair to say that most people know you as the man that ignited the Monday Night Wars. What was it like to be a power player during that era?
You know, it's interesting looking back on it now, some 20 years later. I know this will sound a little hard for people to relate to, but I didn't realize it while I was in it. Meaning, during that period of time when we were going head-to-head, things happened so quickly. The business grew to such a phenomenal level of success, not just for me and WCW, but also for the WWF and WWE. But it all happened, it was like you're on a treadmill, and every day the treadmill goes faster and faster and faster, and you don't realize what you've done until you get off the treadmill. So, when I was in the middle of it, it was intense, it was fun, it was exciting. We blazed a lot of new trails, reinvented the wrestling industry really as we knew it then, and even today, many of the things that came about as the result of that Monday Night War, the battle between WCW and WWE, many of the changes in the industry and the things that we initiated and created as new and exciting are still, prevalent today in WWE programming. And I'm very proud of that. But it was just an amazing time. It's really hard to describe. I see it more clearly now looking back than I saw it while I was in the middle of it.
I think you touched on something really interesting there, where you said that it evolved at a very rapid pace during that time period. I remember being a 12-year-old watching it, happen in Australia here on some dodgy cable networks we had, or on some less than legal variations of cable networks that we had. And I just remember that the constant change was so exciting as a fan. Did it create a pressure cooker environment for you as the talent?
Not so much as a talent. The pressure cooker came when I was the president of the company and was really overseeing all the divisions within my business unit. Being a talent was fun, and it was actually a release. It was the most enjoyable part of my job. The other 95% of my job is where the pressure came in, and I have to say that that wasn't. It was fun in a different way. I mean, it was challenging in a different way. Therefore, in many ways enjoyable, but the pressure associated with it could be less than fun at times. Let's put it that way.
Is there anything that you pushed for that you wish that you didn't now, or vice versa?
No, there was nothing that I pushed for that, looking back, I regret or would change. There were many things I pushed for that I wasn't able to push through and complete that I'm, I wish I would have, excuse me. For example, I had an opportunity to produce a network special for the largest terrestrial broadcast network in the United States, that being NBC. And the executives in my company, for whatever reason, decided that they didn't want to take advantage of that opportunity. And I think that was a very bad call on their part. There was a pay-per-view that I was very excited about doing New Year's Eve, 1999. Everybody was, you were probably too young to remember back then, but, there was a lot of people concerned about what was going to happen to the internet. And, people anticipated so many, radical changes at the turn of the millennium. And there were people that were literally afraid of what was going to happen. And I had organized and negotiated to do a pay-per-view here in the United States featuring the band KISS. And it was going to be a combination KISS concert, WCW wrestling pay-per-view, where we would open up with KISS at one end of a stadium. It would have been an outdoor football, American was football stadium. And KISS would have opened up the show, and then we would have gone to the other end of the stadium, and we would have had our first match. And we would have kept going back and forth all night long between matches and a KISS concert. And I really thought that would have, been pretty spectacular. But again, Turner executives, for a variety of reasons, didn't want to do that. There was a lot of complaints among staff about having to work over the Christmas and New Year's holiday week. And people were legitimately concerned about air travel and what was going to happen at the turn of the millennium. So I got voted down on that. And I think that would have been a spectacular event.
It sounds like it would have been amazing. You got taken down by the Y2K bug. I guess that's one opponent you couldn't script yourself to win against.
Well, the bug didn't exist. It only existed in people's minds. Well, what I got taken down by were people who were afraid of the bug. I wasn't concerned about it. I didn't really believe that anything crazy was going to happen. But I think the bigger issue for a lot of, because when you put on a pay-per-view like we were contemplating, you're talking about a staff of 100 to 125 people
completely
that would all have to work over the Christmas and holiday weekend in terms of production staff and wrestling talents and so forth. And out of that, 100 to 125 people, there were a good majority of them just didn't want to work over the Christmas and New Year's holiday. I understand that to a degree, but being the kind of competitive person that I am and workaholic that I've been in most of my life, it was very frustrating for me. But, as they say, que sera, sera.
Now, as a kid, you were a fan of the wrestling business, but I don't think it ever crossed your mind that you'd end up working in it. How did you get your initial start out at AWA?
It's a long story, but I'll condense it for this call. I was a sales manager for a commercial food processor. And I also had an idea, because I've always been an entrepreneur from the time I was a very, very young boy. And I had an idea for a children's game, an action game, that I wanted to manufacture and distribute myself. And I thought the best way to do that would be to integrate my game and advertise it within a wrestling program. So I went to a wrestling promoter in Minneapolis by the name of Vern Gagne, where I lived in Minneapolis, and arranged to have a meeting with him to present my idea. And he liked the idea, but I think we developed a relationship. I think he was impressed with my enthusiasm and my energy and the fact that I was an entrepreneur, and I was a good salesperson. I was pretty good at that. And Vern happened to need someone to sell sponsorships and syndication and things like that. So he offered me a job. I went in there to sell a game, and I came out, with a job. So I never contemplated getting into the wrestling, but I was always a fan of it. But it never occurred to me to try to get a job inside of the wrestling business. So it was really more coincidence and timing than anything.
That's brilliant, but you had the foresight or the insight to say yes to the opportunity, which I think is a very important landmark of your career.
Well, I've always been a risk taker, and at my age, I'm 64 years old, or I will be soon. I was a product of the late 50s and the early 60s. That was my childhood. And that was also, television was fairly new, at least where I lived. I lived in a lower middle income, low income kind of, neighborhood. And that was back at a time when, almost everybody only had one television in a house. It was before color television was really available to most people. Color television was only available to people who were, more or less higher income people that didn't live in my neighborhood. Television was a very important part of our lives, and it was family viewing. So back in the 60s, I remember, there were certain programs on television, and the family would gather around to watch, certain programs, whether it be a Western or Ed Sullivan or some kind of variety show or game show. Television was a very, very important part of our family and our culture, and it was still new. And having had that impression growing up as a young boy, I was fascinated with television. And even to this day, I make a joke every once in a while how it's a little bit like a microwave oven today. Everybody has one, but no one can tell you how it works, or why it works. So when I had the opportunity to work for Vern Gagne, what excited me most wasn't so much being in the wrestling business, although that was exciting for me. I don't want to minimize that. But the idea of learning how television is actually created and produced, and how it makes its way from, an idea in someone's head to an entertainment property in somebody's living room was a fascinating learning opportunity for me, and that's what I was really most excited about.
And you ended up bringing a lot of innovation yourself, which is quite impressive. Now, you've made the jump over into podcasting, much like Bruce Pritchard did, and you've both seen some pretty amazing success with it. Do you see that as a new and exciting media platform now?
I really do. Podcasting, 4 years ago, there were very few people even talking about podcasting. It's a relatively new medium. And like anything new, particularly, a new medium that's so intensively technology-based, it changes almost every day. And, we're able to do things now within podcasting that nobody would have contemplated a couple of years ago. The quality of the podcasts are continuing to improve. And while all that's happening, the audience for podcasting is really growing at such a rapid pace. And that's what's fascinating. So it really is, it's a fun, creative outlet for me. It's fun for me to talk to, fans who are interested in the Monday Night Wars and the history and the backstage stories that, people have always wondered about. Those are all, really exciting things and fun things for me to share with my fans. But more than anything, I think I'm fascinated just with the ability. I've got people that, subscribe to my podcasts in probably 120 different countries around the world. I've got, wrestling fans that listen to my podcast in Korea, in Russia, in India, and, obviously Australia, and, countries that I had to actually Google because I never heard of them before. So it's kind of crazy, but it's a lot of fun.
And you're bringing that 83 Weeks podcast out on tour in Australia. Is there anything in particular that you'd like fans of our podcast to know about that show?
Yeah, I mean, here's, when I bring out 83 Weeks, now my broadcast partner, Conrad Thompson, isn't going to be with me, obviously, but, the format for my live show is going to be very similar to the live shows that I do here in the States, where, I generally will spend, they're usually 2.5 hour shows, and I'll spend the first 15, 20, 25 minutes just kind of getting to know the audience and letting them get to know me just a little bit. And then we dive into, a question and answer kind of format. And that's what's fun for me is every show's different because everybody in the audience, every audience is different. Everybody's got different questions. Everybody's got different things they want to know about. And the audience has the ability really to direct the show because it's so interactive. And I'll get people up on stage and I'll let them act as my co-host, for example, and we'll treat it just like a regular podcast where we'll break down, a pay-per-view or an episode of Nitro or something like that, just like we do in the podcast. And I think by doing that and making it so interactive, it's a great experience for the fans, and it's a great experience for me because every night is different. And the shows tend to be, I tell people they're like one half comedy, one half educational, and one half just crazy. And it all depends on the audience. Every show's different.
It sounds like it's going to be a hell of a time. Now, I'm going to get you to play a little game before I let you go. This game is called Frankensteiner. And essentially what I'm going to ask you to do is Frankenstein together the ideal pro wrestler. You get one person for the physique, one for the in-ring ability, and one for the promo skills. What's your wrestler look like?
Okay, let's see. Let's start out with physique. I would probably, I think John Cena is probably within the last decade or so, in terms of physique. Even now, in fact, he's really leaning out now because he's breaking into the movie industry. But I would say John Cena for this physique. And what was the other option?
In-ring ability.
In-ring ability. Man, Shawn Michaels, probably.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think Shawn Michaels. I would have to go with the Shawn Michaels for sure. And what was the last category?
And then the promo skills, so mic skills.
Well, I love Mick Foley, even though Mick Foley was a different kind of character. I loved his promo ability, but I would probably have to go with Steve Austin. Steve Austin was, much like myself, he had the gift of the ability to improv. And I think, again, because of wrestling, when you're wrestling in front of a live audience, just like my live show in Australia, all three shows are going to be very different. They'll each have their own different, unique personality because the audiences are going to be different. And the same thing happens when you're wrestling in the ring. Oftentimes, wrestling in Sydney, for example, would be different than wrestling in Brisbane or different than wrestling in Melbourne because the audience is different. And a highly skilled performer has the ability to read that audience and adapt and improvise to the way they're reacting, or in some cases not reacting. And Steve Austin, I think, probably more than anybody I've worked with, had that improvisational ability and skill more so than almost anyone I've worked with.
Well, that sounds like an absolutely amazing pro wrestler, the absolute ideal, and I'm sure someone over at the WWE is trying to manufacture that in the Performance Center right now.
Oh, I guarantee you they've probably been working on that for the last 20 years.
Now, I'm going to let you go. So let's go home with a quick, good old-fashioned promo. Tell these marks like myself what we can expect from the 83 Weeks Australian Tour that you haven't mentioned yet and why we absolutely must not miss it.
So you want me to tell you what to expect before you even come to the show? I've got news for you. I'm not going to tell you what to expect. You're going to make a commitment. You're going to come to the damn show. You're going to have a good time, and you'll find out what you can expect. But don't ask me to give it away for free. Come on. This is the wrestling business, for crying out loud.
That's amazing. Thanks for being on Radults. You are a certified Radults, and I will see you in Melbourne.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much, my friend.
Bye, Eric.
Bye.
That brings to an end the Radults Bite with Eric Bischoff. You can see Eric Bischoff live on his 83 Weeks podcast tour this June. Dates are Friday the 21st of June, Factory Theatre in Sydney, Saturday the 22nd of June at the Brightside in Brisbane, Sunday the 23rd of June at the Thornbury Theatre in Melbourne. Tickets are available via tickets.destroyerlines.com. We thank you for joining us today for this Radults Bite, and if you enjoyed what you heard today, we encourage you to follow, like, rate, and share our content. Then go out there and live life a little more Radult.